So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Debbie Singizer, and I'm the Board Services Director at the Vermont School Boards Association. And I'm thrilled to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Partnering to Prepare for the Rollout of Educational Quality Standards, the Role of the School Board. We are so fortunate to have with us two experts to present on the recent updates to the Educational Quality Standards, or EQS, and how these will positively impact our work as school board members. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our two panelists who are joining us today and to thank them for coming. Natasha Eckert is a school board member at the Washington Central School District. And Chelsea Myers is the Executive Director of the Vermont Superintendents Association. Welcome to you both, and thank you so much for presenting on this very important topic. I think I'll hand it over.
Thank you, Debbie. That was a really lovely introduction. And I just want to preface, I am not an expert in this subject. However, I did spend 4 years serving on the Act One working group. So I do have an in-depth knowledge about that process, but I am certainly not an expert in the areas that we'll be talking about. I do want to pass it over to Natasha because you might want to introduce yourself in a different way. So before we get started.
Sure. Thanks again for inviting me to be on this panel today. I am also not an expert, but have been immersed in this work for the last 4 years and have done trainings in a couple different capacities. So getting a pretty solid understanding about all the information. Just so you have a little background, I was a teacher, educator. I taught elementary school as well as I was a STEAM teacher, K through 5, for a couple of years. And I currently am working with the Educators Union, Vermont NEA, as well as sitting on the school board. So I wear a couple different hats and come to this work from all of those perspectives. And I'm really excited about what EQS means in terms of the future of public education in Vermont.
Thanks, Natasha. The session objectives today are pretty broad. We are going to be moving pretty quickly, so we encourage you to ask questions as we go along, and we'll try our best to answer them. The first objective is to learn about Act One, why it is important work, and about the status of where the education quality standards revision is. And we will also explore how the EQS updates impact the work of school boards and share, hopefully you all will share some of the ways in which your board is already moving towards the underlying goals of Act One. Next slide, please. Thanks. So again, the plan is a little bit fast and furious. We'll do a quick introduction and warm up. We'll talk about what Act One is and why it is important. We'll talk about the education quality standards, the role of the school boards in this work. We'll have a little question and answer and talk a little bit about what's next. So in the chat, please answer the following 2 warm-up questions. What do I know about the education quality standards? Nothing is a completely acceptable answer. And what do I want to know about the education quality standards? So we'll pause just for a second. I won't wait too long just because of time constraints, but what do you all know and want to know about the education quality standards? Reminder that chat, you need to select everyone. Thank you, Ellen, for getting us started. Starting to come through. People have read through them. About the process, what's in the new EQS. Some people have followed the revisions very closely. Great. Debbie, I think we can move on for the sake of time. Thank you for sharing those with us.
Okay, so we're going to spend a few minutes just thinking about why there was a need for a revision for the EQS. So at the Act 54 report on racial disparities in state systems concluded education is one of the 5 state systems in which racial disparities persist and need to be addressed. Another report also came out and said that when there was conversation with administrators and school boards, part of the response, and this was before 2017, it was back, I think, in 1999, was that it wasn't one of the top priorities for administrators to be thinking about. Luckily, in 2024, that thinking has changed across the state of Vermont, but we want to just have people revisit that this is a systemic issue that's been happening in our state. And while many changes have been put in place and we're in a much better place than we were, we still have work to do. And so the changes to the EQS are the response to it. So this slide just gives some data about hate crimes based on race, sexual orientation, religion, and ability. I'm not going to read all of these slides word for word because you will have access to them later. But again, we just wanted to give you some statistics and data about why the changes to the EQS are so important. And then in 2019, there was more data that was brought out that was specific to the queer community. And these statistics are pretty staggering. One of the things that I just wanted to point out is I highlighted a section there at the bottom of the slide, and that's because there has been a shift in the language that we use when talking about suicide. We're going to put a resource out for you that's called Language Matters and why we don't say committed suicide anymore. But I just wanted to give you some background. One of the reasons we don't want to do that is because the word committed implies like a sin or a crime. And when we talk about successful or unsuccessful, it's kind of sounds like we're celebrating or saying it's a failure. So words really matter. And so we're really trying to shift how people think about the impact of the bullying and the hate behavior that's happening and be more thoughtful and humane in the language that they use. So Act 1 is the ethnic and social equity standards for public school. It was advocated for by a coalition of BIPOC, LGBTQ plus, and people with disabilities around the state of Vermont. And out of that, the working group was established. And the role of the working group is to review the standards, review state statutes, board rules, and school district and school supervisory union policies. And the idea is really to make sure that there's thoughtfulness around inclusion, culturally responsive, anti-racist, and anti-discriminatory changes. And this is just a picture of those of us who have been working on the Act 1 working group. This was taken at our first meeting, and I think we only had one more in-person meeting because COVID happened quite rapidly after this, so a lot of the work was done online. But as you can see, the working group was made up of stakeholders across the educational spectrum in Vermont, including students. We wanted to make sure that student voice was a part of the work that we were doing.
All right, so moving to what are the education quality standards. The education quality standards are a governmental rule. They're authorized by the State Board of Education and impact all Vermont schools with the caveat that there are some exceptions within the rules related to independent schools. The guide, broadly speaking, articulates important school values, objectives, and aspirations, as well as provides directions to school districts in the areas of things like curriculum, learning materials, and instructional practices. Historically, this guide was not traditionally thought of as the role of the school board, but with the updates, there are several places in which school boards play a role in implementation, and that's more clearly articulated than it was in previous iterations of the education quality standards. standards. So the Act 1 revision process was a pretty long timeline. In 2020 to 2021, the Act 1 working group determined that the education quality standards would be a good starting place in terms of achieving the goals of Act 1 and established a subcommittee. We spent extensive hours in that working group engaging stakeholders for many different drafts towards a revised education quality standards, including parents, students, education administrators. There was a lot of input in the revisions of that education quality standards. In spring 2022, the Act 1 working group voted to send those revisions to the State Board of Education, in which they would undergo formal rulemaking. In that process, after they also did their own look at the education quality standards, they then entered into formal rulemaking beginning in June 2023, took a year to get the final rule approval, and those rules go into effect on July 1, 2025.
Sorry, Chelsea, was this slide me?
It is, but I'm happy to do it
Okay,
too.
I apologize. Yeah, can you take it? I apologize.
Yeah, this slide is just emphasizing kind of the lens in which the education quality standards was revised under, really thinking about promoting critical thinking around the history, contributions, and viewpoints of many different ethnic and social groups, encouraging students to explore questions about ethnic and social identities, as well as around issues of equality and racism, providing welcoming spaces for all students, and developing pathways for families to talk about their children's experience. And you'll see some of these themes as we kind of dissect each section or many of the sections of the education quality standards.
So as Chelsea just mentioned, some of the recommendations that have been put in place to support all students are creating safer spaces for students, concentrating on the well-being, culturally inclusive spaces, restorative justice practices, and really it's thinking about teaching from a broader lens and trying to incorporate as many different groups as possible, both historically and currently, what their contributions have been to what's happening within our country and also globally. So the next 5 slides, you'll have a chance to look through these when you get access to the PowerPoint. So I'm not going to go through each one individually, but they do speak to individual groups and how the updates support each of those groups. And one of the things that I do try to stress is that when we talk about the equality standards, many times people think the ethnic studies framework, and so their brain automatically goes to, oh, this is just looking at how race and ethnicity are going to be focused on within the school systems. And the updates to the new EQS go beyond that. They really are looking at how do we change the systems and the different types of teaching practices that we use within our classrooms so that all students are being provided a safe learning environment where they can come in and fully access their education. So the next 5 slides do speak to poverty, BIPOC students, LGBTQIA students, students with disabilities, and supporting multilingual students. And again, when you get the slides in the email, you'll have a chance to go through each of those bullets.
So if you move, yep. So the statement of purpose is really the framing of the education quality standards. There was a lot added to that. And so I do want to pause and give people a chance to looked through at least part of this definition, or this statement of purpose, if you need me to read it out loud, can you please just send me a chat message? You can send it privately, and I'd be happy to read it out loud. But I think this is an important framing for the rest of our conversation, is just to sit with the statement of purpose for a minute or two and kind of pull out some of the changes, which are plentiful and really focus around providing a student experience that is equitable, anti-racist, culturally responsive, anti-discriminatory, and inclusive. And so I'm going to pause and just be quiet for a minute unless someone indicates they would like me to read it out loud. And we'll just kind of frame the rest of our work together today in this statement of purpose. So again, this is to indicate that right up front, the changes that are reflective of the Act 1 charge are right there in the front of the statement of purpose. Next slide, yeah. Next slide. So the changes of the EQS are plentiful, and different people in the system have different roles and responsibilities in the successful implementation. And I've talked to a lot of different key people in the system in terms of the way that they're thinking about implementation. And I would say the common themes there are taking it one section at a time, evaluating what you're already doing well and building upon that. And so not trying to take the 23 pages all at once, but really taking each section. And I've heard, like with administrative teams, that they're taking a section of it and looking at it and saying, what are we doing well already? And then what are some areas that we can build on those strengths to help support the implementation of the education quality standards. And I would definitely recommend those tips that you take it a section at a time and build on strengths as well. So what we're going to do for the most of the remainder of the time is the Vermont School Boards Association has this wonderful essential work of school boards guide, and in it are 6 primary pillars of what the work of school boards is. And the first being establish a vision and engage the community. This is critical to move the district forward. More people that are invested in the vision creates a more effective, or creates the more likely possibility that it will be effective and that you'll all be moving towards it. The second is to establish policy. This is the board's prime lever for applying leadership and guiding the operations by district staff, and it supports moving the vision to reality. The board and superintendent partnership consists of hiring the superintendent, working as a team with the superintendent, and evaluating the superintendent in a way that is consistent with the vision and mission. Effective and ethical operations is the responsibility of the board to conduct itself ethically, lawfully, and transparently. A lot of those responsibilities lie in running inclusive and effective meetings. Monitoring progress and performance. So the board must ensure that the district makes reasonable progress toward its goals through monitoring progress, typically in the form of qualitative and quantitative presentations from the administration, and the board asking meaningful questions towards those goals. And then budget and financial oversight. The budget is a communication tool of your values as a school district. The board develops and adopts a budget that supports the vision and mission. And so again, we will do a crosswalk of these essential pillars with some of the sections of the EQS. And I pulled the sections, or we pulled the sections that are most relevant to the board's work. And so this just outlines some of the sections that we will go through. You can move forward. So the first section that we'll talk about are instructional strategies, and what the changes ask school districts to do is to support educators and the list is actually longer in the the revision itself, but I summarized that list. I think it's like A through N actually in the manual. But in summary, it will ask educators to examine how their own biases may impact their teaching practices, model high expectations for all learners, apply culturally responsive teaching practices, reduce barriers to learning for all learners, cultivate learner agency, and foster well-being and belonging in the classroom. And so before we reveal the next part is going to show what could school boards do to support this section of work. But I'm going to ask you, based on the pillars that we just covered, what are some things that you might be able to do as boards to support this element of the manual? And I'll pause for 30 seconds while we populate the chat. Set policies. Yep. Encourage training, provide funding. I like it. We're aligning with the pillars. All right. Debbie, can you do the reveal? All right. So what can school boards do to support this particular section of the education quality standards? They can hire and retain a superintendent that has demonstrated values and leadership skills that align with promoting more equitable and inclusive education systems. They can support high quality professional development through collective bargaining agreements and the budget, which I saw a lot of those answers or that answer in terms of budgeting in the chat. And they can request data related to climate, such as student sense of belonging, and disaggregate it from when possible to see if students really do feel like they are belonging in school and seeing themselves in the curriculum, which one of the points and the changes is for there to be culturally responsive teaching practices as well as student agency. So getting some data from students about those topics could be particularly useful. All right, the next section is college and career counseling and flexible pathways. And what does the EQS now say? It says that we need to expand ways to embrace the diversity of students, including cultural, racial, ethnic, linguistic, social, disability-related, and neurodivergent identities when planning for and providing flexible pathways. We need to make sure that resources and opportunities related to flexible pathways are accessible to all students and families who wish to participate. And we need to monitor who uses programs and who doesn't participate so that schools can identify and address any barriers to participation. We won't do the chat feature this time, but I will surprise you with another pop quiz where we do it in the chat again soon. So what can school boards do? Well, they can request data from administrators on who is accessing flexible pathways and why or why not students are participating in flexible pathways. They can actively pursue student voice on flexible pathway experiences, and they can ensure that the budget reflects opportunities for access to flexible pathways.
And Chelsea, can I just add one piece to that?
Yes, and I'm sorry I didn't pause in the instructional strategy. So if you want to rewind to that, please do.
Yeah, so with instructional strategies, the only thing that I would add to that, and it is hit on in those bullets, but when you look at language within the collective bargaining agreements, having strong language around allowing time and access for professional development, but also time and access to co-planning with other educators, with your, and just having the appropriate amount of planning time so that educators really can do the work they need to do and implement that into their lesson plans. The other two pieces I just wanted to add were when we think about hiring and retaining superintendents, having some sort of tool like an equity checklist that can be used when thinking about what kind of questions you want to ask and what are some of the skills that you're looking for. And then also in terms of data, that I know a lot of times the data is based around testing and academics, and really being thoughtful in terms of what kind of data we're looking for in terms of how we know whether the students are really being successful. And then within the career and technical education, the only piece that I wanted to add is, and I think that these bullets that are in there imply this, but within technical programs, it can be really hard for women to have to go in and be accepted in those spaces, as well as students of color, and also students who are identifying as other gender identities. So really creating spaces within those programs so that all students feel like they can go in and be accepted and be safe and have access to those pathways that are different than just going to regular education.
Natasha, you're cutting a little in and out. I don't know if you're putting something over your microphone, but it sounds like you're getting further away. So just for next time that you're on.
Sorry, I'm in a hotel, so it could be the Wi-Fi.
I think though it just sounds like you're getting further away from your microphone almost.
Okay.
Curriculum content is section 2120.6, and then there's coordination as well, which is 2120.7. And what the changes ask school districts to do are state that curriculum shall be equitable, anti-racist, culturally responsive, anti-discriminatory, inclusive, and accessible to families and community members. Adds ethnic studies as a content area to be integrated across content areas. This is a huge one. It is adding a separate content area to what we currently offer, and it's thinking about it as like kind of an umbrella lens over what the content we typically or we already do offer. And so if we think about it from the lens of like something like transferable skills, which are embedded in other content areas, that seems to be a relatable parallel when talking to administrators, that it does not necessarily need to be standalone, that it should be integrated within other content areas. To create systems to continuously monitor the progress toward EQS goals, and to create and maintain supporting policies for ethnic and social equity studies. We will talk more in depth about the policy piece in a little bit, but just wanted to highlight that as a change in those sections. All right, next, yeah. So what can the school board do? Well, they can ensure existing policies align with the EQS. Again, we're going to talk about what some of those policies might look like, and we can monitor progress toward the goals laid out in the EQS. I'm going to turn it to Natasha on the curriculum content before we move on.
Great, thank you. So one of the things that I wanted to put into the space is that, is my mic better now, Chelsea?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But Washington Central has been doing a lot of work around policies, and we are happy to make those policies available to other school districts and supervisory unions. But we have created an education philosophy, which is more of a resolution than a policy, but that education philosophy is based off of our SLO statement, our Humanity and Justice Coalition vision statement, and our core beliefs, which came out of our strategic planning process. And our education philosophy is then referenced in other policies that we've put in place. We also put in place an equity policy. We've got the library media policy, our HHB and Title IX, and then we just created a new policy about creating learning spaces where civil discourse can happen. And through those policies, we're actually referencing and citing all the different policies and resolutions within those, as well as connecting them to the new equality standards of the IRIS framework, because we really want to show that there is a thread that is consistent across all areas of our district, not just in the curriculum, but in how we believe that students should be able to access their education, what that looks like in terms of the materials that they have available to them, as well as how our students and our staff are going to be able to kind of exist within the space. And we wanted there to be continuity of the same message across all of those spaces. So it's not just that we've got this philosophy and you never really hear about it again. But that philosophy is actually embedded in all of the different work that we're doing. And then again, tying it back to the quality standards. So we've been really thoughtful about making sure that what we're putting in place is consistent across the board, and allows our educators to be able to do the work they need to do, and our students to have access to the safe spaces and the curriculum that they need in order to be real members of the community and the global society.
Thank you. I see a question about curriculum. It says, does the curriculum worded here mean the state standards or a scope and sequence? The education quality standards does not go into a whole lot of detail around curriculum and is mostly tying it back to the state content standards in this case. For graduation requirements, what the changes ask school districts to do is align the changes of the manual with expected graduation requirements, add information outlining a district's responsibilities in supporting English learners on their path to graduation, particularly as it pertains to the students' personalized learning plans. So what can the school board do? It is the responsibility of the supervisory union board to ensure alignment and expectations for all students within a supervisory union. So being consistent across the supervisory union. Have a clear vision for student outcomes. Some of you use Portrait of a Graduate for this, or a vision for student learning. Ensure that the vision for student learning maintains high expectations for all students, and use data to investigate disproportionate negative outcomes for students, for example, with disciplinary action, academic achievement, graduation, and invest resources and services that aim to improve success of those on the margins. School leadership and professional development. The changes ask school districts to state the clear goal of creating anti-racist, culturally responsive, inclusive learning spaces for education leaders, and requires school leadership, including principals, school boards, and others, to participate in professional development that increases their understanding of these goals and advances equity. And so you can imagine this is a pretty important section, because it is kind of the support that the whole system gets in order to enact all of these changes. So what can school boards do? They can ensure the budget reflects investment in professional development aligned with these goals. They can hire and retain superintendents who have demonstrated values and leadership skills. So again, we're seeing some common themes brought up over and over again on each of these sections. And we will also summarize at the end in one place all of these where there's redundancies. So Natasha, you had something you wanted to add here.
Yeah, the one thing that I wanted to add is the goal of hiring and retaining the superintendent to demonstrate these values, who then can continue to hire administrators, who then hire educators. And that is all well and good, but if you have not done the work to create a climate within your schools and your district that is inclusive and safe and supportive, you can do all the hiring you want. Your employees are not going to stick around. And that is something that the state of Vermont has needed to work on across districts throughout the state, ensuring that we are creating environments and climates where, when we are having educators, administrators, superintendents coming in who are BIPOC or LGBTQ+, or any of the other historically marginalized groups that we need to think about, that if that climate is not in place for them to feel like they are truly a part of that district and that environment, they're not going to stick around. So it's not just about making sure you're hiring them, but it's about making sure that the environment that they're being hired into is a safe environment for them to stay in.
And Natasha, we have a question in the chat that I'm going to lean on you for. How, when we're thinking about professional development for educators and the alignment with the collective bargaining agreements, how do we put emphasis on, like, for example, what is in the education quality standards that's prioritized for professional development? Because I know there is a lot of choice involved in PD. And so how would you recommend, or how do you think about kind of having that common goal towards professional development towards this particular effort?
So when I think about the ed quality standards, and this is one of the ways that I've been trying to message it in my role as a person who works for the union, as well as kind of a former educator. What we're really thinking about here isn't just content, but it's really about teaching practices and transferable skills. And it's about how do we create spaces in our classrooms where students can come and be their full authentic selves and feel brave enough to be able to participate in the instruction that's being provided. So I think that there's a way to provide professional development to everybody that may not necessarily be focused on the content piece that needs to happen. But I think first and foremost, let's think about what best teaching practices are and what kind of transferable skills we want to provide our educators, who then can provide to our students, to be able to just interact with their education in a general way. And once we get those pieces in place, then the content really comes in. So I think instead of thinking it as two different things, think about what are those best teaching practices and those transferable skills that we want our educators and our students to know and be able to participate in order to have civil discourse, in order to question, in order to recognize and research, different types of resources. So I think that there's a way to do that across all content areas and all grade levels, because it really comes down to the foundation of what does good teaching look like and how do we provide those spaces for students.
Can move on. Thank you for that, Natasha. The state and local comprehensive assessment system in section 2123, what are the changes asking school districts to do? They added, the new rules added that schools must disaggregate data to determine opportunity and achievement gaps. And as you all know, there are some very strict rules and regulations around when you can present disaggregated data. And I would definitely lean on your admin team, or in some cases legal, if you have questions about that. But just being very careful that we're not identifying any students inadvertently during the disaggregation process is very important. Continuous improvement plans must include ways to improve equity and inclusion in the learning environment. And the plan shall be developed by involving a culturally and socially diverse group comprised of school board members, students, teachers, administrators, families, and other community members. And so it's really thinking about community engagement in the sense of, where do all voices in our community want the school district to go? What's their experience, and how are we involving those voices in our improvement plans? What can the school boards do? School boards should provide feedback and approve the continuous improvement plan that's in the rules to include strategies and support systems for a learning and social environment that is safe, orderly, civil, and positive. That language is right there in the education quality standards. And then ask for data reports to investigate disproportionate negative outcomes, again, for students, and invest resources and services that aim to improve those areas in which data is showing that we are disproportionately impacting students or student groups. So again, we're seeing a lot of common themes highlighted throughout the pillars, but thought it was important to go through these individual sections and really think about how the changes are going to impact school boards and just school districts in general. I think the more time we sit with it, the better off we're going to be come July 1, 2025, when you're all tasked to implement. I also wanted to add here before I turn it over to Natasha is that you'll notice that a lot of these systems really depend on the agency of education in a lot of ways. And so one of the things that we as associations have gotten together to do is try to provide advocacy for you all towards the education or the agency of education on aligning systems that they're responsible for example, like the continuous improvement plan templates and things like that, so that you all have resources available to you at a statewide level. And so we are advocating for that on your behalf frequently, and will continue to do so in order to make it so that we are not once again asked to recreate the wheel in 56 different supervisory unions or school districts or supervisory districts. Natasha, you had something you wanted to add here?
I just wanted to just really reaffirm the concept of having student voice and community voice in there, especially if you're working in districts where you have a really diverse group of families and students that are attending your schools, making sure that you are hearing the voices from those parents and what their students need, as well as what students need to be able to show up and be able to engage in their.
Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about policy here, because this is one of the probably largest areas in which school boards have an impact on implementation, along with community engagement practices and improving our community engagement practices. So I wanted to focus in on the school board policy piece, and the language directly from the education quality standards is that each supervisory union, supervisory district, and school district board shall ensure the alignment of existing policies and create new policies as needed to ensure compliance with these education quality standards. When undertaking this policy work, boards and school leadership shall engage with the communities they serve and seek input and guidance through a process that includes the diverse voices and experiences of students, parents, and legal guardians and other community members who are often underrepresented in this work and in school decision making. I want to emphasize that if I were to say one paragraph that you should take away in terms of the role of the school board in implementation, that this paragraph is the paragraph that emphasizes the biggest role that the board has in this work. What it says to align the existing policies, and so what you might choose to do, and several school districts have done this, is to take an equity lens or get an equity consultant or an equity audit on those policies and look throughout your policies to see if they are in alignment with the core goals of the education quality standards. And then you might also choose or need new policies. And we chose to highlight 3 specific ones here. These are the policies that were in focus in the recommendations of the Act 1 working group. One being an equity policy, making sure that if you don't have it, that you explore the possibility of having it and that you look into it to make sure that it's aligned. And if you do have it, you look into whether it's aligned with the education quality standards. The library material selection policy is now going to be required by July 1, 2025. So that is something that boards will need to adopt by July 1, 2025. The School Boards Association and the Superintendents Association are working hard on getting that model policy to you as soon as possible. And also required in the statute is procedures as well. And so we will be providing a model policy and a model procedures to adhere to this particular law. That will go in effect July 1, 2025. And so based on your policy adoption timeline and schedule, it's important to have that on your radar going into the winter and spring of next year. And then the last one, which may not be as familiar to all of you, is a community engagement and vision policy. And I will send some resources that I have found helpful when thinking about a community engagement policy, because the education quality standards are asking us to be very intentional about our community engagement process. It might be worthwhile to consider a community engagement policy that holds the board to the community engagement practices that the education quality standards require. And I have a couple of examples that I'll send along to Debbie to put in your resource packet following the webinar. Anything else on policy? I know you talked a little bit about it, Natasha, already, but these are the 3 core policies we talked about in the working group, but you might have some others that you want to talk about.
Well, like I said, we put in place the policy around creating learning environments where students can engage in civil discourse, which really, it really thinks about how do we create safe spaces where students can have brave conversations around the content that they're learning. The one thing that I would add is our district went through an audit. We worked with Great Schools Partnership, and they gave us some suggestions of policies that they felt could benefit us. And so some of our policies are a result of that. With the equity policy, when we were creating ours, we took examples of equity policies from around the state of Vermont, because there are some really excellent equity policies that are already in place across the state. And the one thing I would say about that is some districts have equity policies that are like 6 pages long, because that's what they needed for their district. Ours is not that long, because we were able, the needs of our students, the needs of our staff were different than the other districts. So as you're going through these policies and you're looking at sample, model language, you really want to be thoughtful about what makes sense for your community and the body of students that you're going to be supporting. Not all language is going to fit all school systems. And the other piece I just wanted to, we went through a huge process, a strategic planning process, where we had a lot of community engagement, and we developed a set of core beliefs that came out of that. And one of the things that was really exciting for me as a school board member and a member of the ACWIM working group is when I looked at those core beliefs and I looked at what the changes to the ed quality standards were, they overlapped. And there hadn't been conversation about the changes to the ed quality standards at that point. Our community members, through the process, just developed, this is what we believe in and this is what we stand for. And it is in such great alignment with the work that was done around the ed quality standards. And I think that that's just really important to share, that this may seem like, oh, here's some big changes coming in. It's one more thing. We got to think about, we have to make these real sweeping changes. But a lot of what's in there are things that your community is already thinking about and already believes are things that are important for their students and for themselves to be able to be successful learners and be successful within the district. So I think it's going to be really thoughtful work, but it's also really important work, and take advantage of the resources that are out there and lean into districts who've already started doing this and supervisory unions that have already started doing this work. And there's a lot of great examples of work that's happening across the state.
So I realized that there was a lot we went through, and that was just some of the sections, although it was like the bulkier of the sections that we went through, and it was fast and furious. It's only an hour. We were trying to get through 23 pages of revision. So definitely recommend, again, to take it step by step. But TLDR, for those of you who don't know, is too long, didn't read, or too long, wasn't paying attention. So what we've done here is put, based on the 6 pillars of essential work of school boards, a summary of the role of the school board within each of those pillars. And so what it does is reduces some of the redundancies from slide to slide and puts it on one kind of final cheat sheet for school boards. on the things that you can be thinking about within each of the domains that you work on and through governance in this one table. So if I were to say to take one thing away in terms of like a handout, this one would be it. And I do want to recognize that I missed a question or two in there. I did it intentionally because they're kind of technical questions. So I don't want to do a disservice to, particularly when it comes to the laws and regulations that are needed to answer the questions. So I will follow up with those people that I missed answering their questions. But I do want you to know that I did see you, and I will follow up with you afterwards. I do want to open it up to any questions. And then after the questions, I do want us to end with how I think a lot of us are ending trainings related to the education quality standards. And that is building upon what you're already doing and sharing with one another what you're already doing. As Natasha said, it's really important to just share things because people are already doing a lot of this work in different areas, both in governance as well as administration, as well as in teaching. And so there's no benefit of operating in silos, and we're trying to do our best to make sure that there's some cross collaboration going on. I know the Principals Association is actually met yesterday, is doing a program for principals and administrators. We're available for boards and superintendents, and the NEA is doing a lot of work. The Vermont NEA is doing a lot of work with the educators that are in their network as well. So any questions that we can answer for you, and then we'll also pop up the exit ticket slide as well. My question is around accountability, especially for boards. The connection between the AOE and state board isn't always clear. I'm not sure, Amy, if you mean like an enforcement mechanism, because if that is true in terms of the if that's what you mean by your question, I think that that's an area that we have historically been lacking in, and there has been, especially in the last couple of years, a little bit of a disconnect between what the state board is doing, the AOE is doing, and what is required in in schools. And so I know that's not a great answer, but if you have a follow-up question, or perhaps you and I can take it offline on how we might be able to remediate some of that, if at all. But yes, I think that the kind of tripartite relationship between those three entities has been shaky at best in the last 3 years. And in terms of big A accountability, there is not a whole lot in statute that is there. I would say in this case, the primary lever is through the continuous improvement plan with the AOE, which is one of the big areas that we've been talking to the AOE about, revising in both process and materials in order to successfully implement the changes. There is a question about an article in Digger that said there may be changes to this draft due to legal concerns. What is the status of the issue? I'm not aware of any pending legal issues currently. We would be remiss not to mention that with the changing administration and what could happen federally, that there's really no way of knowing if there will be legal challenges in the future related to this, but I am not aware of any pending legal concerns. There were some challenges in terms of how it applies, how it could apply to independent schools versus public schools, or independent schools receiving public funds in public schools. But they, for all intents and purposes, have resolved that by doing a parallel set of rules called the 2200 rule series.
And the only other thing I would add is that this isn't a draft. Like it's
Correct.
finalized.
Yep. Yes, the accountability issue, I'm happy to do a little bit of follow-up. I don't know how much follow-up I can do because I can't make the statutes change miraculously. There really is not a whole lot of an accountability mechanism embedded within the education quality standards. If I were to channel what I think the Agency of Education would say, I think they would point to the district quality standards coming and the efforts that they're using or they're doing to create accountability around the district quality standards as in total, rather than just the education quality standards is how I think they would answer that. But again, the continuous improvement plan to me is the area in which there's any hint or indication about the continuous improvement plan or about the education quality standards implementation. Do you have a different read on that, Natasha? But I will try to follow up on that question. All right, we timed this really well, but I do want you to depart, please. Yep, that slide. I do want you, before you depart, to just throw into the chat quickly. You don't need to do all of the questions, but particularly, what is your district doing well already? We want to know because we want to reach out to you and share some of those things across school districts. Again, this was a fast and furious webinar on something that is pretty big and complex. And we are happy to support you further, but we hope this was a good primer to at least get started thinking about some of those changes and what the board can do. That's a good question about student outcomes coming from the state. I, again, don't know the answer to that, but I can pass those questions along to the Agency of Education. Some of you have some good policy frameworks that you're heading into these changes with. District doing well with community engagement. I will have to follow up with that person, see what you're doing to do effective community engagement. Strategic plan includes the equity lens. That's awesome. Our leadership team is using the EQS like a book group and taking one section at a time and considering what we do well and what we can do better. Doing climate surveys. Embedding equity in PD opportunities. These are all really great things, and I think is a great way to send you all off is you're already building from a really strong base in a lot of cases. And if you are not or feel like you are not, there are a lot of people that are, and we'd be happy to connect you with those people.
I was just going to ask you, Chelsea, if you're seeing anybody asking for support or types of support, because I guess I would speak to those school board members that are on the webinar right now to say, if you're feeling in a little bit nervous or like you're in a panic mode after hearing this and thinking, oh my gosh, we haven't started doing any of this, I don't even know where to begin. I would suggest and encourage you to reach out to the VSBA and we can connect you with other boards that are doing the work already. We also have a chairs forum that meets every 6 weeks. 6 weeks. And I think the next one's next Friday morning. So that's another great way if you're a chair who wants to see what other boards are doing, use that network to pick other people's brains and get ideas. You don't have to do this alone. There's a community of board members out there and we all can work collaboratively together and share lessons learned.
Great. I want to respect Natasha's time and just say a big thank you for joining us for the webinar. And Also, just want to do one last message again that you're not alone in this. I'm seeing amazing things that you all are doing in the chat, which is really exciting. And we'll keep building on that.
Yeah, thank you all so much for joining us.
And thank you, Chelsea and Natasha, for, again, I'm going to go back and I'm going to call you experts, because after listening to what you just did, I feel like you really do know this extremely well. And we are grateful. If you don't want to call yourselves experts, we're grateful to you for sharing your knowledge with all of us. That was really very helpful. And I'm excited for all of us. So thank you for joining us today. And thank you, everyone who tuned in today. And I hope you all have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.